Episode 2.5 Casey. Casey descended into the bowels of the skunk babe, detached in the way one can only get while on their commute to work. He'd spent the last 6 weeks working either in or around the skunk babe's engine room. Knowing that he'd been obliviously within reach of his would-be killer gave the anxiety of the past several days newer and darker shadows. Unsurprisingly, Ingram had not wanted to delay putting down the killer which had snuck aboard the convoy named Menagerie. Despite his bone-deep fear, Casey couldn't help but agree. He'd never been allowed access to the engine itself, a fusion-powered monstrosity that rested inside of 18,000 cubic feet of housing. He had, however, spent much of his time refining the engine's lubrication and coolant systems. If the killer tampered with either, the whole rig would melt in on itself under the gentle touch of superheated plasma. "Can you hear me, Case?" Ingram's voice vibrated into his ear via bone-conducting earbuds. "I hear you," Casey responded, his voice returning as a dour echo as it bounced around the cavernous hall that ended in the engine room's door. "Don't be nervous," Ingram said, voice firm but not unkind. "Nervous? Who's nervous?" Casey stifled a laugh, high-pitched and manic, knowing that if he started, he'd not be able to stop his nerves from taking over. "I'm only walking near a nuclear reactor in a room populated by one sociopath willing to commit miniature genocide." "That's the spirit, Case," Ingram responded. "Remember that there's only one sociopath. I've got 4 PKs already in position, each of them equipped with Adirak-grade weapons and visors. He won't get within 10 feet of you." Rather than respond, Casey ground his teeth. Once again, here he was, denied all options other than the one which put his life in danger. In Casey's experience, life had 2 intrinsic qualities. One of them was randomness. If the Hall of Records back under Neil's dome was to be believed, the fabric of reality itself was some complex growing thing, fueled by a randomness too small and too fast to ever truly measure. This in itself was not so bad and could be quite encouraging. When taken as dumb luck, life's events had about as much malice in them as the roll of the dice. No matter how bad things got, there was always a chance for life to deliver on a natural 20. Unfortunately, life's other intrinsic property was soul-gouging unfairness. These 2 traits played off each other, making Casey's life a miserable bastard of an experience. It was difficult not to believe that every bad thing which happened did so because creation itself hated Casey, personally. The engine room was sealed behind a watertight bulkhead door, similar to those used on pre-Inferno ships. Gray, metal, and about as welcoming as an unmarked tombstone, the thing loomed like the last seal of judgment. When it opened, Casey would face the ultimate ruling of life's randomized cruelty. "I'm at the door," Casey said. "All right," Ingram said. "We're going to open it remotely." Casey could hear the hushed barking of orders in the background as Ingram III's crew set his plan into motion. "Do me a favor and don't respond to me once you're in there." "Why not?" Casey asked. "If something goes wrong, I should be able to reach you." "We want the killer to think we're offering you to him," Ingram replied. "You asking for help would destroy the already paper-thin ruse. Now, shut up." The door swung away from Casey, its silence a testament to the legendary upkeep of the suppliers. The engine room served the singular purpose of housing and maintaining the rig's fusion generator, as well as its accompanying turbines. The floor was a perfect square, running nearly 5 stories on each side, while the ceiling rose 2 stories in height. The generator itself was housed in a massive 20 by 20 foot hole at the center of the room. Various control and access panels were built into the sides of its casing. Ladders and scaffold-style walkways provided easy access from the floor down to each panel on the generator. 2 turbines rose like shark fins from either side of the generator, each spinning at several thousand rotations per minute. They ran the entire length of the room, overarched by several more graded stairs and walkways. On his first day, the room had evoked a sense of awe in Casey. That such a complex machine was so lovingly maintained gave him hope that things would not be as desolate and run down as suggested by the dome's travel ministry. Now, the room's size and various shadows made him painfully aware of how many places the killer might be hiding. "Walk towards the center of the room, Case," Ingram said. "This will give the PKs a larger window before the killer reaches you." Casey almost asked where they were hiding, but caught himself in time. He moved toward the generator pit, fear stiffening his joints. "Good," Ingram said. "Get up on one of the turbine walkways. Become as visible as possible." Casey did so. As soon as he reached the apex, however, he froze. Some unnameable sense of being watched filled his mind. He tried to tell himself that this was just Ingram's hidden peacekeepers. That was when he heard it. The sound of something hitting the floor behind him. Casey wanted to turn and see what made the sound, but he couldn't. Fear held him like an invisible wall. His muscles locked him rigidly in place. "Casey, I need you to get off the walkway. Run to a wall, any wall, and grab an oxygen mask." Ingram's voice, controlled and authoritative, cut through the fear like a knife through gelatin. Casey, suddenly freed, turned and saw the body of a man. It lay close to the edge of the room, limbs and back twisted at impossible gestures. The visor, which he had been wearing, had been cracked on impact with the ground, shattering and spilling out in front of the man's face like a trail of sequin vomit. His face was purple and bloated, his eyes and tongue swollen to the point of caricature. Casey stared, mouth agape, but only able to produce vague squeaking noises. To his right, the sound of another body hitting the floor echoed through the room. "Casey!" Ingram yelled in his ear. Casey spun on his heel, intentionally turning the opposite direction of where he'd heard the most recent body fall. He sprinted off the walkway, leaping over the bottom 5 stairs in his haste to achieve whatever escape Ingram clearly had planned for him. Running straight towards the wall, he once again heard Ingram's voice. "Case, listen. You have 5 seconds to reach an oxygen mask. We're flooding the room with argon." "You're what?" Casey half yelled, panic strangling his voice. "No time to argue. He's already killed 2. Ingram's voice cut off as a third body impacted the concrete floor. "3 of my 4 peacekeepers in there with you. Let's see if the bastard can survive without breathing for a bit." Casey could already hear the hiss of gas exchange as breathable air was pumped out of the room and replaced with argon. A detached part of Casey's brain reasoned that this system of argon injection was used as a fire suppressant, and quite a genius one at that. Should anything in the engine room catch fire, what better to deprive it of oxygen than an inert gas? By the time he reached the wall, Casey's breathing had already become labored. He looked for the green indicators through the haze, just barely making out one to his left. After about a quarter mile of dragging his oxygen-deprived legs, Casey reached it. It was locked in a yellow container, red letters across its face warning, "Highly flammable, emergency use only." A palm-sized panel sat to one side, thin green text reading, "Scan Palm ID." Triumph filled Casey, the brief spike of adrenaline momentarily clearing his head enough to understand what he had to do. He was one palm scan away from safety. He held out his hand, but before his palm could touch the scanner, a pain seared through his body. Fire ants marched up from his right butt cheek and out across his lower back, biting and stinging like living flame. In fact, Casey was sure that was not ants, but actual fire. He had been lit on fire, and it was spreading across his body. Casey opened his mouth to scream, but his throat was already closing up. His eyes, open a moment ago, had swollen shut. He collapsed, feeling something akin to relief as the cold concrete floor pressed up into his flame-wreathed face. Faster, even, than it had spread, the pain stopped. 1 minute, he was engulfed within, and then he wasn't. It felt as though he had stepped into the next room, leaving the pain behind. Casey was dead. Thalamus. Thalamus's internal clock counted just under 14 days since he had entered his state of desiccated hibernation. His regimented circadian rhythm coalesced the sense of lost time into a concrete number. Partially hydrated neurons communicated with all the efficiency of a dry sponge. There was no rush, however, as a hunt such as this one required time. Thalamus was patient, purpose-built to be so from the ground up by the Neal sisters themselves. Impatience was a genetic impossibility. Reaching out with his other sense, Thalamus felt the contrasting pools of magnetic north and south deep within himself. Simple geometric images of the continent oozed through his mind, coordinates appearing in sudden flashes of calculation. Over 600 miles between him and the dome. Getting on to the convoy hadn't been difficult. Baseline Homo sapiens weren't that observant at the best of times, their senses too limited to notice anything truly out of the ordinary. In the dark and cold surrounding the dome, when winds blew fist-sized chunks of ice at both mechanical sensors and human sentinels alike, no one was likely to take notice of the lank, dark figure loping alongside the convoy menagerie. The process of finding the traitor itself had proven a challenge. The suppliers had surprisingly advanced security systems. Still, they were no match for Thalamus. The first few weeks consisted of dragging supplier peacekeepers out onto the northern ice sheet and convincing them to divulge their passkeys. Thalamus had even allowed himself to collect a few trophies, genetic samples for if he ever ran into biometric locks. It had been as close to fun as he was capable of feeling. By the time the convoy was leaving the ice sheet, Thalamus had narrowed down the traitor's location. He had loped alongside the rigs one final time, a flitting long-legged shadow that caught up to the one they called Skunk Babe, and clambered aboard. He knew exactly where to hide. Different though they were in external shape, most rigs had the same basic internal design. Like a parasite slinking through the body of a larger host, Thalamus made his way to the engine room and wriggled into one of the many access spaces. The space was the type small enough to be overlooked as a hiding place, simply because no human would be able to fit into it. Once there, he went dormant, his body stopping all functions and desiccating itself. He left his mouth open as he slept, tongue uncurled into something like a bifurcated octopus tentacle. Each side tugged in its own direction, constantly tasting the air, waiting for one of several sets of conditions to be met before sending the wake-up signal to his brain. Now, Thalamus crawled out of his hiding space, centimeter by centimeter until, at last, his contorted form fell noiselessly to the floor. Specialized pores drew in ambient moisture and trace minerals from the surrounding environment. The pain of stretching stiff muscles danced through Thalamus as the assassin untwisted his body and stood. The target was near. It sent a beacon in his mind. There were, however, others in the room. Thalamus paused, standing still as a statue, muscles locked in place as if held by metal bands rather than organic ropes. 4 of them, armed, waiting in blackout stealth suits if he was correct about the scent of their cloaking paint. Thalmus was impressed. These hominids set up a trap for him. He spent a moment trying to count out how many years it had been since he'd faced anything approaching a challenge. It was time to enjoy himself. Hidden by the shadow of the turbines, Thalmus stuck one hand to the wall, then another. He then placed one long, bare foot on the wall, followed by the other. Silently, his skin shifting color and texture to blend into the background, he climbed up the wall with as much ease as one would climb up a ladder. The whole roof of the engine room was covered in chains, cables, and winches. Since no heavy machinery was used this close to the reactor's casing, this was how the Skunk Babe's crew lifted and moved oversized objects. It also provided as much cover and vantage as climbing into a tree canopy. The suppliers had been clever, suspending themselves, each covering a quarter of the room with large, impressive-looking firearms that had been welded into the ceiling. But they had not known about Thalmus's sense of smell or hearing. They certainly didn't know that he was able to climb walls, or of his cephalopod-like ability to camouflage himself. The first one died without much of a struggle. Thalmus swung through the mesh of cables and chains, simian-like and utterly silent. He came right up behind the man and stabbed him in the back with his dart. Swelling caused by the poison took effect immediately. The man panicked. Thalmus always enjoyed watching the contortions of his prey, but restrained himself on this occasion. Rather than risk superfluous noise, Thalmus clambered above the man and gave him a solid kick towards the floor. The straps holding the man snapped, and he dropped. He was dead before he hit the concrete. The second, third, and fourth peacemakers were a bit more of a challenge, the death of their comrade putting them on higher alert than the first. It made no difference. One by one, they fell clutching at their throats, trying and failing to scream. When Thalmus had finished silencing the fourth peacekeeper, he jumped lightly from the machine canopy. He landed on his feet, reinforced bones preventing any fractures and padded soles negating the sound almost entirely. Thalmus followed his senses as he drew closer to the traitor, the sound of its impure heart filling his ears like the rushing thrum of a river. The smell of its fear-tinted sweat cut through the background sense of oil and blood like sunlight through a cloud of smoke. Thalmus held something similar to a dragonfly in his right hand. He felt it squirm against his palm, eager for use. It was not alive, at least not by any real definition of the word. It was, however, very aware of its purpose. Thalmus was nearing the traitor. He could see it running against the wall. Thalmus started to wonder why, but a wave of dizziness swept over him like a lead blanket. This, of course, did not slow him down. He strolled toward his prey, surmising that it was in a state of panic and thus not likely to act rationally. At last, the traitor stopped running. It stood still, observing a wall-mounted box. Thalmus saw the chemical symbol for oxygen on it. That meant something, but he couldn't think what. His thoughts were too muddled, sticking to each other like strands of spider silk. All he knew was that he had to poison the traitor. Everything else was secondary. Only 20 feet away, but Casey couldn't see him. Smiling to himself, Thalmus took aim with the small knot dragonfly, pointing its curled-up proboscis at Casey. It did not matter that intricate silver wings folded around its body like lace, or that its color wasn't, as it first appeared, jet black, but rather the rainbow opalescence of engine oil spilled into water. What mattered was how well it could kill people. The proboscis stiffened, tapering to a point so sharp its tip vanished from sight half a millimeter before it actually ended. Thalamus aimed, timing the impulses going down his arm to offset the general sway and rumble of the rig. He threw it directly at Casey. In less than 2 milliseconds, the dragonfly's wings unfurled as it propelled at the traitor. It hit the traitor directly in its butt. This time, Thalamus watched as it struggled, writhing and bending like a wind-up doll that had stripped a gear. Thalamus allowed himself to feel a shriveled sliver of pride. Then, something unexpected happened. Thalamus collapsed as well. He sent signals to his arms and legs, telling them to move, but they did not respond. It was as though they had run out of energy, independent of what his head said. His breathing became more shallow, the air moving different. It was thin in his lungs. Soon he wasn't able to breathe at all, each lungful of air less satisfying than the last. Thalamus could feel the oxygen levels in his body dropping, his metabolic processes slowing down even further. As a response, his body automatically went into desiccation mode. The hominids got him. He had fallen into their trap, but only for now. Nothing they made was perfect. The traitor was already dead. All Thalamus had to do was wait, and the opportunity for escape would surely present itself. He allowed another sliver of pride to cloud his thoughts as blackness took him. He was, after all, a very patient man. You have been listening to Dead Arcology, written and recorded by me, Michael K. Ostis. If you enjoyed this story, please consider sharing it. I have episodes on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Podbean, as well as several others. Updates, schedules, and news can be found on the website, deadarcology.com, as well as on the social media apps Blue Sky and Instagram under the username Dead Arcology. If you want to help Dead Arcology grow more directly, please consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/deadarcology. Thank you again for listening. It really helps a lot. I very much appreciate you giving this story your time, and I will see you in about 2 weeks. Goodbye.